we had a similar pattern in region in South Bend where, the downtown South Bend was the hub of shopping, downtown Hammond, downtown Gary, hubs of shopping. Eventually, you get the University Park Mall, you get development along the highways, like those types of things. Like people start shopping elsewhere. We had the South Lake Mall here. Shopping patterns change. But you really like a main street and a downtown is what gives a place its uniqueness and its character, and it's where people gather. And you just have to really appreciate those places and spaces that meant so much to us. And it's something we hopefully are able to pass on to the next generation.
You heard that there. That is Joseph Peet, reporter for the Times of Northwest Indiana, author, and lifelong Hoosier, talking about the ebbs and flows of Hoosier shopping habits and stressing the importance of appreciating our local spots. More of that later, but first, thank you for listening to another episode of Round the Bend Now and Then. My name is Matt Emery, and I'm a local history nerd. My main mission in this podcast, as well as other Round the Bend material, is to create engaging content that shares how intertwined the South Bend and Mishawaka area's past is to our present. In the podcast, I interview local leaders, business owners, and community members to help tell their stories, because their stories help tell the story of South Bend and Mishawaka. In this episode, I meet with Joseph Peet, journalist and longtime business reporter and columnist for the Times of Northwest Indiana. And when he's not covering steel mills, restaurants, businesses, and the changing economy of Northwest Indiana, Joseph is also an author who has written several books exploring the places, people, and stories of the Hoosier State. Our conversation focuses on his newest book, Lost Treasures of Indiana, a beautiful coffee table-style book packed with color photographs and short histories of places Hoosiers once knew and loved. And yes, South Bend and Mishawaka made the book. We talk about several of our area's lost treasures, but we also venture across Indiana to remember beloved restaurants, stores, attractions, entertainment venues, and other places that have disappeared but certainly have not been forgotten. Joseph also shares how his travels around Indiana helped spark his appreciation for local history, why these seemingly small stories matter, and what he's learned about the similarities and differences between communities across the Hoosier State. If you love Indiana history, nostalgia, and discovering the stories hiding right under our noses, then you will enjoy this conversation, and you will definitely want to check out his book. A link to his website is in the show notes. A huge thank you to Danbury Insurance and MT Box Computers for your continued support of Round the Bend Now and Then and our local history. We'll get into the interview with Joseph Peet right after a word from one of our sponsors. I've been working with Danbury Insurance for over 25 years, and I can tell you from personal experience that they're the real deal. In a world where customer service can feel like a lost art, they've always taken care of me the right way, every single time. They're a locally owned agency with deep roots in our community, and that matters. When you call them, you're not getting a call center somewhere. You're talking to people who live here, who care about this area, and who genuinely want to help you and protect what matters most. Whether it's home, auto, business, or life insurance, they take the time to walk you through your options and make sure you're covered the right way, not just the easy way. If you're looking for an insurance agency you can trust, I highly recommend giving Danbury Insurance a call or check them out online at danburyinsurance.com and tell them that Round the Bend sent you. Again, a big thanks to Danbury Insurance for supporting the show and for taking care of folks in our community the way they always have. And now, back to the episode. Before we talk about your book, brief introductions, tell us about yourself, where you're from, all that good stuff.
Oh, absolutely. My name's Joseph Peet. I'm a business reporter at the Times of Northwest Indiana. I'm an author who's written 5 books about Indiana, mostly about Northwest Indiana, but my new book is my first covering kind of the state, the Lost Treasures of Indiana. I've spent most of my life in Indiana. I kind of grew up in I grew up in Hammond and Highland in the highly industrialized area known as the region, known for its steel mills and sand, right down the street from South Bend. My dad actually went to Notre Dame, and we would go to Notre Dame football games all the time when I was a kid. We would tailgate always before the games and do all the rituals, like watch the steak sandwiches and watch the band go across campus and
Yep.
visit all the landmarks and so forth. So I've have long standing, and we visit South Bend all the time now for Notre Dame
Nice.
and other reasons. But we got and was raised Catholic, so I've
Yeah.
long and went to Catholic school for 13 years, Our Lady of
Mhm.
Grace in Highland and later Andran. So have like kind of long standing connections to that.
That's great.
And then I just cover business and industry for the Times, including some stuff in St. Joseph County and South
Uh-huh.
Bend occasionally. I've always covered like the steel mills in New Carlisle, the
Mhm.
finishing lines out there, and lately I've been covering like the Amazon and GM
Yeah.
Samsung developments and some of the bigger developments in that area. But then also occasionally, if it's like regional, we covered like we covered like when the dinosaur museum opened and when the new Racklin Museum of Art opened and when
Right.
the things of that nature, things that would be of interest to our readers
Of
or
course.
be familiar with. Because we share the South Shoreline. You do have a lot of
Mhm.
region folks visiting, South Bend.
Right, of course, of course. Hey, you mentioned some of your other books have been more focused on Northwest Indiana. You wanna talk about them for a little bit?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I wrote. It started with Lost Hammond, Indiana. The History Press, it's a special you've interviewed a few History Press
Yeah.
authors before, but they commission, like, history books, like, for communities all across the country,
Uh-huh.
and, my colleague at the time he was at the Post-Tribune, but Jerry Davich, who's a columnist now at the Times Northwest Indiana newspaper, he wrote Lost Gary, and it did pretty well, so they were looking for more books about Northwest Indiana,
I
and they
see.
had reached out to me about writing, something about the region, and having been born in Hammond and spent a couple years there, I just that was what I ended up focusing on, and it's kind of just an interesting history where it started out as a slaughterhouse company town where it was spillover from the Union Stockyards in Chicago, and it ended up growing into this like oh huge manufacturing town where you had WB Conkey and all these things, but it's just like like rich, fascinating history. It gave birth to Gene Shepard and A Christmas
Mhm.
Story. They had um, the famous Goldblatt's department store where the Christmas
Yep.
Story scenes were set in. You had
Yep.
Perch Palaces like the Phil Schmitz and Vogel's and Paramount and Parthenon Grand Movie Palaces. The downtown was like a mini State Street from
Got it.
Chicago, and it just had a very rich, fascinating history with ice harvesting on Wolf Lake, the nuclear missile site where they're gonna shoot down Soviet bombers from there. Failed amusement parks, and at one point had the largest, wooden roller coaster in the Midwest. And then wrote a similar one about East Chicago, lost East Chicago and Indiana Harbor, where it looked at how it was a very diverse melting pot where the steel
Yep.
mills drew in people from all over the world, especially Eastern Europe. But at one point, like, something like 90% of the residents were foreign born in Indiana Harbor. You would have,
Dang.
like, 6 different languages spoken on the same block,
Right.
people from all over, especially Eastern Europe, but people from all over the world. And then it looked at just kind of the rich sports history, and Michael
Mhm.
Jordan played his first game in a Bulls uniform there, and the rivalry between Washington and Roosevelt, and how it produced Junior Bridgman, who was one of only, like, a handful of NBA players who went on to become a billionaire, and in his case, he was the only one who did it because of kind of his business acumen and not because of,
Wow.
being
On
Magic
the court.
Johnson or
Yeah.
LeBron or being a superstar, because
Uh-huh.
he was a great six man, but he was a six man. He wasn't,
Right,
anywhere near
right.
like Michael Jordan or anything. But and that was another one about kind of the another industrial city, and then the other two were Lost or Secret Northwest Indiana and
Mhm.
100 Things to Do in Northwest Indiana, and Gary Northwest Indiana Before You Die, and both of those are kind of travelogues. Part of
Yeah.
it was Mitch Skirdick had written A Native's Guide to Northwest Indiana, which was a great travelogue to the area that when I was living down in Indianapolis, it really like made me nostalgic and homesick and that type of thing.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then, but there hadn't been an updated one for like 20 years.
Uh-huh.
So I pitched Reedy Press, another local interest publisher, about doing that. And it just kind of highlights like, the Indiana Dunes, the Symphony Orchestra, Pierogi Fest, different points of interest all around the region. And Secret Northwest Indiana is similar, but it's more history focused, where it looks
Yeah.
on just kind of bizarre quirks in the local history, like submarine experiments on Lake Michigan, the 50 shipwrecks just off the Indiana coast and some of the stories behind them. The early flight experiments that Octave Chanute conducted that informed the Wright brothers along the
Wow.
dunes, the serial killer Bell Guinness, things of that nature. Um, it's just kind of that one mixes travelogue with history, and it's a lot more of the off the beaten path type places.
Which I love. Love it, just like some of the Lost Indiana, stuff in there. Before we get to the book, how'd you form your appreciation for local history? Did it just kinda something since you loved as a kid, or has it evolved?
That's a great question. I love your tagline. I'm a history nerd because I definitely would
Yep.
agree with that sentiment. Um, the I would say yes because I kind of grew up in I went to high school at Andran High School in Maryville on the border
Okay.
of Gary, and Gary has all these majestic abandoned buildings
Yep.
such as City Methodist Church, the post office, Union Station.
Mm.
There was the uh, high school auditorium where the Jackson Five played one of their first
Right.
concerts.
Oh,
Places like that of like great historic significance that were kind of left to rot. The Palace Theater that were left to rot for decades. In some cases, have now been empty for longer than they were even
mm,
open in the first place.
God.
And that sort of thing kind of it was part of the landscape where you'd drive by it or walk by it and you'd see it all the time, and then you'd wonder about kind of the glory days and the heydays.
Right.
So it kind of sparked an interest in the past and what was the story. And then also would go to Chicago all the time as a kid, like take the South Shore lineup.
Oh, yeah.
And then I'd sort of wonder why, like why movie theaters in Chicago would get repurposed as concert venues. But it would, that didn't happen in Gary and that type of thing. So that kind of steeped me in it and got me interested in it. And then part of it was just I've always been a huge reader. I'm a
Right.
big book nerd. I've been reading for forever. You get kind of the shock of recognition when you read about like local history. I was always kind
Yeah.
of drawn to authors like Kurt Vonnegut because it's he's referencing Indiana.
Uh-huh.
And it's the kind of the shock of the familiar, and that kind of drew me to it. And then I think it was from the curator maybe of the history museum on your podcast made a greght point about when you start learning about it, the more you learn about it, the more interesting it becomes. And it was
Uh-huh.
kind of definitely that sentiment where all of a sudden you're informed about the history of the Palace Theater, these places, and then you just kind of want to learn more about the other there are 50 movie theaters in Gary at one point, and you want
Yep.
to learn more about where they were and what they were repurposed as, and how many are vacant, and kind of you get more interested in the architects of that era and the atmospheric designs where they would make the roof like twinkling stars and that
Mhm.
kind of thing. And then you discover they designed similar movie theaters all around the country, and it just kind of piques your interest in that era, like locally and across the um, country. So that definitely sparked it. And then just in Northwest Indiana, that we have a lot of great historians. Some have passed, some are still alive, but like Archibald McKinley, James Lane, they've done some excellent, fascinating work that I've been drawn to, and it kind of has definitely kindled and kept my interest up. And then another aspect to I'm also a huge museum goer.
Okay.
That's probably my first preference is going to a museum, especially when I visit new cities or places.
Yeah.
So just due to that, also I've just gravitated toward history, and I've been interested in local history, not only like where I'm from, but when I visit a place, I like to learn more about,
Yes.
how did Cincinnati develop around the traffic on the
Yeah.
Ohio River, and it was the highway before there were highways, and those types of things.
Yep.
Like it just kind of interests me how the places kind of grew and developed and became what they eventually became, and I just find it fascinating.
You're darn right, and going down rabbit holes before I knew what the word rabbit hole meant. Kinda
That's a
like
great point. Yeah.
kinda one thing sparks your interest, leads you to the next, and that leads us to your book, Lost Treasures of Indiana, and I was, at our family's my wife's parents have had a lake cottage down in the Warsaw, Wawasee, North Webster area for decades, and I was down there sitting outside on our pontoon boat, just meandering through the pages, reading them, and for anybody who this isn't some heavy, thick with facts, history. No, this is about the places that meant a lot to people, that are now lost to time. And anytime any of these places probably get brought up in their hometown, you probably have all types of stories. So what sparked you to kind of branch out from Northwest Indiana to write a book about all of Indiana?
Oh, well, my publisher pitched it to me. They
Oh,
do,
nice.
a lot of the local interest, publishers, like, outside of the academic presses, like, the only places you can really get, like, local kinda history published is
Okay.
usually somewhere like Reedy or History Press or somewhere like that, where their
Yeah.
whole business model kind of revolves around getting the books in, like, local museum gift shops and local bookstores and those
Okay.
hardware stores or pharmacies or those types of places.
Yep.
But they gotta kinda be keened into the local market because, unfortunately, if you're writing about East Chicago, there's not really going to be that much interest in
Yeah.
California or Wyoming or wherever. It's kind of got to be keyed into the local area.
Yeah.
And my publisher had pitched; they had a Lost Treasures series.
Okay.
Series. I think it
Okay.
started with St. Louis, and then they've added a couple like Delaware and other places. And they
Okay.
pitched me on doing one statewide, and I was definitely interested in doing that because I've lived all over the state.
Yeah.
I lived in I was a reporter in Central I went to school at Bloomington. I
Mhm.
was a reporter in Central Indiana and lived in Indianapolis for years. I visited South Bend a ton as a kid, but I've
Yeah.
traveled all over to various, history like the Lew Wallace Museum in Crawfordsville
Uh-huh.
to the like the Willard Library in Evansville to like the bygone Lincoln Museum in Fort Wayne. Like I've traveled all over the state to go to like different museums and the Ernie Pyle Museum, things of that, and no place is too small.
Yeah.
Places, but I've been to pretty much every corner of the state, just traveling at different points to see landmarks or museums or that type of
Yeah.
thing. So I immediately liked the idea, and I immediately took it up. It was definitely it was definitely broadening my wings a little bit because here,
Yes.
like covering it in Northwest Indiana, I'm very familiar with like the local landscape and
Mhm.
I know who to talk to and call and those types of
Right.
things. But in this case, I had to reach out to libraries and
Yep.
museums and historical societies across the state to make because I was broadly familiar, but I just didn't want to omit like any,
Of course. Yes.
make any major glaring omissions that people would complain about
Right.
not
You got the
including this
date
opera
wrong,
house
sonny.
or oh yes, yeah. It is.
It was 1935, not 1938, you
Because
know?
no, but I have encountered a little bit of that during, like,
I
book
know.
signings and things, but normally it'll be along the lines of, like, "Oh, my great-grandfather was the mayor of Hammond, like, why isn't he in the book?" or whatever,
Yeah.
and then it's like and sometimes it's just a matter of, like, well, it doesn't really fit, like, it doesn't really include very many mayors at all, it's not like a timeline of the political history or
Right.
the book just doesn't that's just not the kind of book it is, and it doesn't really it's focused more on the bygone places, and
Yep.
if they're mentioned incidentally, they're not, like, a core part of the book or anything, so it wasn't intentional that I omitted anybody.
Right. Say, speaking of that, this book is great. I mean, you have colored pictures and one like a paragraph or two about the lost treasure, and it's separated into kind of categories. So we have like lost restaurants, some lost department stores, fast food, and even events. And so that's kind of the way it's set up. But how did you determine like what qualified as a lost treasure? Did people reach out to you, or how does that happen?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the Reedy has a format where they follow it for all their books, like, they
Okay.
want so many restaurants, and they want so many, like, forts and other, point department stores and retail
Yeah.
and amusement parks and things of interest, and then some of it was just things I knew where I knew, like, for instance, like, in the region, the Sousers Kittyland was very beloved, and the
Okay.
Enchanted Forest was very beloved, and in Indianapolis, you had, the Riverside Amusement Park was famed and that kind of thing. And
Mhm.
there are just some obvious ones across the state, like the Monon, rail line and, places like that, the Ellis Ayres Tea Room, places that people still, talk
Yeah.
about. And there were just kind of interesting stories I came across in my research, like Wolfgang Puck getting his start at a restaurant in Indianapolis, a fancy French restaurant, Latour, that was on top of a skyscraper. And, the ones like that you can't omit. Some of it was very personal, like, I included a lot of places like in, Bloomington during my time there where it
Yeah.
was, Bear's Place or Plan 9 or the Cinemat and
Yep.
the Irish,
Irish
Lion
Lion.
and places like that had been around for forever and were very beloved. Cafe Pizzeria, The Laughing Planet.
Yes.
There were in like, when I was there, it seemed like those places were institutions that would
Yep.
last forever and just
They did.
eternal part of the landscape, and it's just shocking, like, later when you discover on social media or the Bloomington Herald Times or something or IDS that it closed, and then so it's kind of, definitely wanna make sure to memorialize these places,
Yep.
but I tried to strike a balance with the book between it does go back to, like, the Indigenous era and, so forth before, like, European settlement, but tries to focus more heavily on like more recent places
Correct. That
where
people would
there's
have memories of today.
yes, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's kind of a coffee, like you mentioned, it's a coffee table
Yeah.
book. They wanted a ton of photos. It's a lot of broad knowledge, but it's not particularly deep because it's like I'm limited to.
Yes.
They give you a word count to for every chapter and everything, so you're not allowed to. I had to cut almost every single chapter in
I'm
it, and
sure.
I wish I could have gone more in depth with a lot of it, but they stick to their format and they want so many you know um be able to cram so many different entries in, and it
Yeah.
also has to cover the entire state from the Ohio River to Lake Michigan, and I took great pains, like, trying to make sure every
Yes.
part of the state was well represented, because it would be easy for me just to kind of do, like, the region, South Bend,
Uh-huh.
Indianapolis,
Bloomington.
Bloomington, but I wanna
Yep.
make sure I have enough places from also Evansville, Fort Wayne, etcetera, but I wanna make sure I have enough places from, like, smaller, Terre Haute and,
Uh-huh.
Madison and, Kokomo and places all throughout the state, and make sure every corner of the state is like, well, you're not going to be able to include every single small town, but you want to make sure that geographically the state is pretty well represented, and that was part of it, just kind of striking the balance. But generally speaking, it
Yeah.
was a lot of places that were around for generations and that people were kind of well known and well beloved. And
Yep.
then a lot of it is, I went around and surveyed libraries and historical societies and made sure what they
Okay.
were suggesting was included, but also places I'll, for instance, see up on some you mentioned you've kind of followed some of those history pages on the
Yeah.
podcast before.
Mhm.
Like, I'll see stuff like in the region, people this one is actually one of the few chains, like, it's not a local one, but people post about, like, Shakey's Pizza Parlor all the
Yes.
time or
Yes.
Celebration Station, and if people are still talking about it,
It
that's the
means
kind of thing I
something.
was trying to, like, include because part of it is just kind of the flood people with those warm feelings of, cozy nostalgia and,
Uh-huh.
remembering when they ate there, formed memories there, that type of thing. And then some of it's more educational, like the Pembroke Arcade was the first mall ever in Indianapolis, and but it's like rare that you see
Yes,
that type
exactly.
of retail left anymore. But
Yep.
so it's got some of the like early history, but it does skew heavily toward history either people would remember or at least be like familiar with, like with uh you'd at least be somewhat familiar with, like, maybe the buildings are still standing or that type of thing.
And now, a brief word from one of our sponsors. Your business relies on technology, but technology needs protection. Our managed IT and cybersecurity services act like your own in-house security team, monitoring and defending your systems 24/7. We just don't fix problems, we prevent them. Local service, real experts, real security. Call MT Box Computers today at 574-277-2775 or head to their website to learn more, www.mtboxcomputers.com. A link to the website is in this episode's show notes. Thank you, MT Box Computers, for all of your support of our content. I'm so very appreciative and glad to spread the good word about your work. And now, back to the episode. And you mentioned the varied regions. This specific podcast kind of focuses on South Bend, Mishawaka. And throughout your book, I noted everyone that was from the South Bend, Mishawaka area. You want to talk about some of them? Throw out a few that you wrote about in the book.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely included the you mentioned it, like the White House restaurant, the
Uh-huh.
24/7 diner. Like, that one I was very familiar with my reputation too. Like, one of my best friends in college was from South Bend, and we really
Yep.
bonded because we have that Northern Indiana connection, but it
Uh-huh.
was definitely one, place where people would go after punk shows, and the region also is filled with Greek diners like that, so it's definitely a very kind of familiar place to me, but, like, with I just like that it has so many nicknames and the Dirty Diner and the,
Fat Shirley's,
Gag and
Gag and
Heave and
Heave,
yeah.
G&H, Greasy Spoon. That building is literally 3 blocks, south of where I'm sitting. That I grew
Oh,
up
cool, cool, cool.
I grew up 3 blocks from the Gag and Heave, and I'm telling you, we tried to get in there during the day, and Shirley would kick us out, and we thought she was the meanest, and it turns out she literally didn't want kids exposed to all those cussing, smoking folks in there.
Oh, that's wild, wow.
Yeah, and then as of course, I got older, we went there after, hanging out at the establishments, and so we were there late night, and, sheer entertainment. You cannot replicate that place. Just like a lot of the other spots in your book, you can't just replicate it. It was wild.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it seems totally like David Tell's that David Tell show that was on Comedy Central where he visits all the late
Yeah,
night spots and
that's
24/7 spots.
that's what it is, yeah. What's another one from the South Bend
Oh,
area
sure.
that you wrote
Yeah,
about?
some of the old sweet shops, like the Modern in the Philadelphia, like
Okay.
the downtown institutions where
Yep,
they would,
yep.
places where you could go get like an egg chocolate milkshake or raspberry ice cream soda or, soda fountains, that type of thing. Like where they had soda jerks and phosphates, and those are also ones where
Yeah.
you still have a couple, like, there's still a couple in like Southern Indiana that are vintage ones. Like there's the well preserved one in Columbus, Indiana, but like those are also places that are like few and far between these
Yeah.
days. The Wooden Keg, the Wooden Keg, the Lido Supper Club,
Uh-huh.
that was more of a chain, but like Captain Alexander's, the A&W Root
Yeah.
Beer Barrel, the College Hall of Fame, which I was fortunate enough to be able to go to before it
Yes.
closed. You did a great
Yes.
episode on that one, but that was
Thank you.
another. But yeah, it's got another area where there are a lot of closures, but it has Wyman's department store with,
Yep.
the, home of 1,000 useful gifts, and back during the era when it was like, downtown was the hub for shopping in
Mhm.
Michiana, and, just chronicling how it, bought out Ellsworth department store next door and
Uh-huh.
kinda kept adding on, and, was, fancy place where people go for tea, and people were drawn
Mhm.
to the brightly lit window displays and the Blake Gardens outside of town with the Venetian gardens, where it was kind of like
Ah.
a roadside attraction
Yep.
where, one thing I love about you see, so when I do research on these things, there's so many postcards where,
Yeah.
but some of it, oftentimes you would wonder how, like, who would buy a postcard of like, oh, a school building or that type of thing. But Blake Gardens would be an instance where it was so scenic that like you totally get right away why, that they're selling postcards for it. But then a lot of the manufacturing too, obviously Studebaker, very well preserved history with the museum, but like, one of
Right.
the major automakers, they, had great national reach, major driver of the economy there, but also, huge national influence, merged with
Right.
Packard, just eventually couldn't keep up with the big three in Detroit. The West Race was like that goes to the early
Yes, I saw
development where
yep.
the manufacturing along the rapids, using the rapids before the area of electrification,
Yeah.
and all the early factories that kind of helped build South Bend into a major manufacturing hub. The wagon works, Singer sewing machine manufacturing, the underwear mill.
Yep.
One thing I've always found interesting too when doing research is how many different products get made in various places.
Isn't that
Like,
wild?
oh, yeah, yeah, it's because, yeah, just, down the street, it's like, but yeah, it gets into, Bendix is another one too, where before Honeywell
Yeah.
bought them, that there is another one where it's amazing, like, how many different, things they made, from, the brake shoes for General Motors to, fuel injection systems to analog brakes to, telemetry components to surface-to-air missiles. It
Mhm.
gets into the, defense contracting with Hummer and Mishawaka, and,
Yeah.
how big they got, and, but, some that had just locations in South Bend, the, Scotty's Brew House, for instance, was
Yeah.
a big national chain, but they probably grew, like, way too quickly, and
They did, yeah.
yeah, but that was one I also enjoyed when I was there, 'cause I like they had the menus like Sports Illustrated.
Mhm.
It was a very trendy for its time. They were one of the
Yep.
early ones to popularize craft beer. They opened their own
Yep.
brewery in Broad Ripple in Indianapolis. Peanut butter burgers and so forth. It's kind of the elevated pub fare helped popularize that. But a couple in Mishawaka too. The Cinema Art Theater was
Mhm.
originally the Tivoli. I think I
Tivoli.
referred to it as the Cinema Art because I had another
'Cause you
Tivoli
had
in the
another
book.
Tivoli, and I was reading that, and I
Yeah.
was like, "Wait a minute." And then and then you mentioned the one in Mishawaka, yeah.
Yeah, because it amazes me how many, there are quite a few with same names when you go across the state. Like, you'll find
Crazy.
with, like, movie theaters that they'll be like, they would just use the same names, like, all over, so it's you gotta, like, try to clarify with, so it's not the same chapter title a couple times. But then, yeah, that's another one where unfortunately that was a grand one where, designed by the Chicago architects,
Mhm.
classical building, Italian Renaissance style,
Yep.
terracotta, and just a massive,
Mm.
built to seat 1,400 people and
Mm.
hosted vaudeville and silent films before. But then the multiplexes just unfortunately just killed that business model where you couldn't show, one
Yep.
screen anymore. And then most of those places sadly have closed across the state. There's a few still going as like performing arts venues, but like,
Not many.
part of history today is that even now the multiplexes are struggling and streaming has
Correct.
really kind of put them on their paces. So everything is just kind of like the downtowns that got battered by malls or, now the malls are struggling because of
Yep.
e-commerce and it's everything
Yep.
is, you know,
Yeah, it's just amazing how the ebbs and flows and the life cycles and yeah, where the Tivoli was at in Mishawaka, that's a damn CVS.
oh, gee, oh,
Ah,
Lord, yeah,
it
that's
is
a
a
pity. That was one
CVS.
of the ones that bothers me most about the region too. There was this Grand First National Bank in East Chicago. My book, the Lost East Chicago and Indiana
Uh-huh.
Harbor gets into it, but it was robbed by John Dillinger famously, and right up
Yeah.
until the end, the bullet holes were still in the doorway from the bank
Oh.
robbery. It was one of his most famous
Oh.
robberies, but it was just this absolutely grand neoclassical structure. It looked like a palace. It was a
Yeah.
couple of stories tall. It was just a beautiful building in addition to the history, but it was also founded by it helped finance the steel mills. It helped keep them afloat during the World
Ah.
Wars, that helped them really grow and develop the area. And then it had a very eccentric owner who dressed like Colonel Sanders and would go around in a limousine and give money to kids to encourage them to start saving accounts.
Oh,
And it's just
love
a
it.
great history. And they tore it down and they put in a Walgreens there. And they already
Oh,
had a Walgreens across the street, but they just wanted one with a drive through. And then the Walgreens ended up closing in like 12 years or something like that.
it
And then
makes me wanna
you
puke.
destroyed all that history that
Yep.
multiple people wanted to save. There are multiple historical groups that attempted to save it, but Walgreens owned it and they just pushed forward with it. And then they didn't even remain invested in the community for more than a short period.
That's awful. Alright, well, hey, I have a few just, questions. You're well traveled around Indiana, and so I'm just naturally curious. Few questions about Indiana and with your travels. How Indiana is wild where you can have vastly different regions, vastly different areas, where it almost all feels like one state, but then it almost feels like you're in a different world. Is that kind of the feeling you get to or what?
I would say so. That's an excellent point. That's one thing I've always we are, united by being, Indiana and Midwestern and
Yeah.
we have a lot of similarities with Ohio and Illinois and neighboring states.
Mm,
But I've always felt though like there are two aspects to that. You have states where there's like a unified state. Like I feel like Michigan and Wisconsin, like you really feel like you're in Michigan or Wisconsin, like
yes.
wherever they just have a unified kind of brand, whether you're in the city or out in the country or enjoying the natural attractions, and some other ones like Texas or California. And I really don't feel like we've had that in Indiana where
Uh-huh.
it's not as like maybe it's not being marketed, it's not as universally embraced, but there's definitely like huge discrepancies in culture between,
Yeah.
southern Indiana and northern Indiana. Like we have a very different in like kind of the South Shoreline corridor with Northwest Indiana and South Bend. We
Uh-huh.
have a very different culture than they do along the Ohio River, where it's definitely far more southern in its influences, and
Yeah.
then and very far different. Even though the great point with you're making is even if you go to cities that are very very similar in size, like
Uh-huh.
um, Kokomo and Anderson and Muncie, they all have very different vibes. They all have a
Yeah.
very different flavor to them, even though they're all like had automotive plants and they're all like manufacturing cities around 60,000. But you have like, Ball State has a huge cultural influence in Muncie. And
Right.
then, the decay is a little more pronounced in, Anderson, but you still
Mhm.
have like ground bones or grand bones of the downtown. But then Kokomo is extremely working class, and you still have the very union and factory influences and those
Mhm.
things. But the vibes are so different, even in like very similar communities. And it is that's one thing they don't like. Some people like see like probably Indiana and the Midwest generally is like um uniform and the corn
Right.
belt and all this, but neighboring Ohio, like you have extremely different vibes. Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus are all very very different cities, And
Correct.
I do feel it is the same in Indiana, and we don't necessarily have that, like, I would say we definitely, like, region and South Bend have a ton in common, like,
Yes.
I bonded with
Yeah.
friends in college over similarities just from being from the area, like, we share the South Shoreline, we share the toll
Right.
road, like, we have tons of it's a very like, the diocese in Gary has, like, so close to, like, 400,000 members, I think, so you have a
Yeah.
ton of Notre Dame fans here. But South Bend also, one other reason I like to visit too is it's definitely one of the great bookstore, communities in Indiana. Like, I would rank it up there in Bloomington with, like, the top tier as
Really?
far as bookstores. Oh, yeah, yeah, like Brainlayer, Erasmus, like,
Yes.
Griffin.
Griffin?
Like, it has fantastic like, I'll find stuff there too I won't find
Wow.
anywhere else. And then because like, Indianapolis, though, has improved greatly since I lived there, like,
Uh-huh.
they've gotten way more bookstores in the past, like, maybe 10 years.
Yeah.
But, like, it was a desert when I was living there for bookstore-wise. It was mostly, like, half-price books and Barnes& and Nobles, which
Yeah.
are fine, but, like, as far as independent bookstores go, it's definitely, like, the class of the state, like, 'cause
Wow, that's
and that's
good to
another reason
hear.
to kind of, to visit.
That's neat to hear, and the Griffins, I mean, that's just generations downtown. It's in one of the oldest buildings downtown. Ken and his wife were here in the '70s, and their original buildings got tore down in urban renewal. He fought the city in urban renewal. Like, that's an amazing story right there in itself, and it's sad because that sits right next to the LaSalle Grill, which is
Yeah, oh,
notable,
yeah.
so Hey, alright, well, I have just like a quick lightning round.
Oh, sure.
Just a few questions in general. It's kind of tied to your book a little bit, and then we'll just wrap it up. So, all right. Well, hey, what is one lost restaurant that you wrote about that you would have loved to eat at?
From South Bend wise, I would definitely say the
Just
Gag and Heave because I love places like that, and I love the vibe and the ambiance. But there are definitely ones around the state, like some of the,
yeah.
I never got to eat at a Burger Chef, for instance, like
Okay.
the, you know, yeah, like those types of, Jim Dandy, some of those
Uh huh.
vintage ones, but almost all nearly almost all of them, to be honest, like,
Yeah.
so a few of them I have eaten at, like Strongbow and Phil Schmidt's and places like
Uh
that,
huh.
but a lot of the Indianapolis ones I had eaten or in Bloomington as well, but, other ones are just kind of known by their outside reputation, but South Bend-wise, like, I would definitely, that just sounds like a fun time.
Oh, it was for sure. All right. What is one present Indiana landmark that you would ensure never would be lost if money was no object?
I would say, like, City Methodist Church probably and a lot of the buildings in Gary.
Okay.
I do understand, they're being they have reasons for tearing them down, and a lot of them aren't salvageable, but if money were
Right.
absolutely no object,
Yeah.
because it's just, like, such a rich link to the past, and it's part of the history, and they've talked about doing things like European ruins gardens and that type of thing,
Uh huh.
and I feel like it's part of a draw, and it's part of the city's reputation and legacy, and it was, the biggest city ever founded in the 20th century, and
Wow.
then, it's unfortunate to see the work of so many, like, prominent architects just, ultimately
Yeah.
face the wrecking ball and everything.
Mm, mm,
Um,
mm.
but some
Hey,
of it
I'm sorry, keep going.
oh, no, but, like, you have in some cases, like, there's the Decay Devils group where they're very committed urban explorers and preservationists, and they've worked to save Union Station, and they've
Okay.
done a miraculous amount of work in getting grants and that type of thing. But there's so many others like the Air, Light, and Water building and the, so forth that are either on the chopping block or might be in a couple years, and it would just be nice if some of that could be preserved as the city redevelops, like, a lot of new development is
Yes.
going in, and that's part of it, but it's like you can have, you can maintain the history and the architecture and still bring in new investment and new housing and retail
Yep.
and, make there's room for both.
You are darn right. Darn right. Hey, outside of your county, what is your favorite county or region or city in Indiana?
Well, I definitely the ones I would discount because I have, like I've been like I mentioned, I've been going to South Bend since I was a kid, been
Right.
drawn to Notre Dame. I consider that, and that's also, like, I almost consider it part of, like, almost like a mega region, like but, like, I'm definitely drawn to that, but then I've lived in Indianapolis, I've lived in Bloomington,
Yeah.
so for personal reasons, I would sort of discount those places from because I have, like, the personal, connection to
Of
all of them,
course.
but out of the ones I don't have a connection with, I would say maybe it's hard to say. I mean, every place has its own flavor,
Yeah.
but I've always been intrigued more by Evansville, I guess,
Okay.
because it's like kind of one I haven't I visited there several times, but I don't get out there a lot because before they
Yeah.
built 69, it was very inaccessible and hard to get to.
Yep.
But it's just a kind of a charming place to at least spend a weekend because they've
Okay.
got a great riverfront, great museums, some very interesting and unique architecture. It just seems like a very, it's partly isolated, but it's also like it's similar to both Michiana and to Northwest Indiana in that it's right
Got
on
it.
the, you have a
River.
blending of the states.
Yeah.
Like you guys, your metro blurs into Michigan,
Uh-huh.
ours blurs into Illinois and Michigan
Yep.
and Northwest Indiana. There are also Illinois and Kentucky. So that's another interest that might go toward the what you were bringing up earlier with so many different flavors
Yep.
because we have so
Yeah.
many areas in the state too where we're influenced by cities like outside of the like Louisville obviously is culturally dominant in southern Indiana, Cincinnati and southeast Indiana. Like you have a lot of you like across a lot of the state, like it's like Cardinals fans in southern Indiana because they'll get the
Yeah.
radio broadcast from St. Louis. Like
Yeah.
so it's like you have a lot of out of state influence like all across Indiana, and that might play into what you're mentioning earlier as far as not being like a completely uniform state. I find every place has its own charms. You can always
Its own
find
flavor.
something
Yeah.
to do and something to learn about a community. Like, maybe, some communities are maybe worth visiting for a day instead of like a week or whatever.
Of
But
course. Right.
every place has its own, like, there's a lot to discover almost everywhere.
Of course, for sure. All right, we'll wrap it up with this here. I mean, you spend a lot of time documenting places that are gone that we still talk about. But when somebody finishes your book and drives past their own neighborhood grocery store, their own neighborhood diner that's still open, what do you hope people will see differently?
Oh, I definitely hope people will appreciate what's there and, try to appreciate what there and cherish it. Because I do a business ins and outs column, which has restaurant closings. And one
Yeah.
thing I've noticed is that, like, oh, well, when new things open, like, there's a Raising Cane's that just opened where it
Uh-huh.
serves kind of generic chicken fingers. And
Yeah.
it's been lines down the street for weeks and weeks and weeks, or chicken tenders, rather. And it's
Yeah.
been incredible lines. Anytime there's something shiny and new, people immediately gravitate toward it. But then when places close that have been there for decades, like when Phil Schmitz was this famous Perch Palace in Whiting, it was very beloved, and there are lines out the door for weeks and weeks and weeks before it closed because people still appreciated it. It's just a
Right.
bunch of other restaurants had opened, and people kind of just took it for granted and thought it was always going to be there. Started gravitating toward other places. Didn't visit as much. Maybe you don't visit like all the time, but just try to make a point to come back occasionally
Right.
and appreciate what's there. If you can't preserve it, at least try to preserve the memory of it. And then, because a lot of these places mattered to people for generations,
Absolutely.
and there's something to be said for something that's been around for, that your parents ate at or your grandparents ate at or, or shopped at or,
Yes.
visited. There's like that thread of history and that continuity that deepens and enriches, life. And it's
Yes.
that everything wasn't just built like a minute ago to make a quick buck. And that
Mhm.
that there's a sense of community and staying power. And then like that's another like a lot of the across the state, like, we had a similar pattern in region in South Bend where, the downtown South Bend was the hub of shopping,
Right,
downtown
right,
Hammond,
right.
downtown Gary, hubs of shopping. Eventually, you get the University Park Mall, you get like
Yep.
development along the highways, like those types of things. Like people start shopping elsewhere. We had the South Lake Mall here, shopping
Mhm.
patterns change. But like you really like a main street and a downtown is what gives a place its uniqueness and its
Yep.
character and it's where people gather. And you just have to really appreciate those places and spaces that meant so much to us. And, it's something we hopefully are able to pass on to the next generation.
Darn right, darn right. Well, hey, Joe, I appreciate your time. And folks, go out and get Lost Treasures of Indiana. It's a wonderful book that for some folks will bring back memories, other folks will teach about long gone spots, and other folks will see that their own city is no different than the city downstate. So thank you for your time, sir.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you once again for listening to another episode of Round the Bend Now and Then. An extra special thanks to Joseph Pete for your time, and more importantly, thank you for your energy and passion towards sharing our local history stories. Join us again next time and learn more about South Bend and Mishawaka's Now and Then.